Welcome to your Antigravity A1 beginner tutorial. Over the next few minutes, I will show you everything you need to know to operate the A1 correctly. I will show you the most important features and how you can achieve the best possible results with your new drone. Although the Antigravity A1 is very intuitive and easy to use, the many components and the innovative but unfamiliar concept can be a little overwhelming, especially at the beginning. That's why I'm trying to keep this tutorial as simple as possible. It's divided into 15 parts, and you can also watch specific parts by clicking on the chapter titles and timestamps in the description. At the end of the video, I'll also show you how you can practice flying in a simulator. And many thanks to Antigravity for sponsoring this video. The Antigravity A1 basically consists of 3 components: the drone itself, the vision goggles, and the grip controller. Before using it for the first time, the first step is to fully charge all 3 devices. I have the Infinity bundle with 3 batteries for the drone and the charging hub, which charges up to 3 batteries in a row. You can also charge the drone's battery directly via the drone's USB port. To do this, insert the battery into the drone from the back with the label facing up. If you tap the back of the battery briefly, you can see whether a battery is charged by the number of LED lights that light up. And if you press the 2 buttons on the side together, you can remove the battery again. The grip controller has a USB port on the bottom. And to save weight, the vision goggles are powered by this separate battery. The goggles battery has a port here on the top. Once the batteries of the 3 devices are fully charged, we need to activate the A1 and perform a firmware update. To do this, you need the Antigravity app, which you can find in the iOS App Store or on the Antigravity homepage. But before we do that, let's take a first look at the drone, the vision goggles and the grip controller. You unfold the arms of the drone by first folding the rear or lower arms outward and then the upper arms. As you know, the Antigravity A1 is not a conventional drone, but a 360 drone. It therefore has 2 cameras and 2 lenses, 1 camera at the top and 1 at the bottom. The images from the 2 lenses are combined internally to form a 360 image. I would say that the lower lens is a weak point of the A1. Small stones can be kicked up during landing and damage the lens. That's why you should always use a landing pad if possible. To prevent the drone from touching down on the lens when landing, it will automatically extend the landing gear. Before you put the A1 down before takeoff, or simply set it down to charge, you should extend the landing gear manually. Don't forget this step, otherwise you could damage the lower lens. Fortunately, you can replace the lens covers yourself in case of damage. You can do this with such a lens replacement kit. The drone has vision sensors at the front and on the underside, which are also used to avoid obstacles or to detect the terrain when landing. The A1 therefore supports obstacle avoidance to the front and below, but not to the rear. In fact, it's not possible to fly backwards with the A1. In addition to the USB port, the drone has an SD card slot on the rear. It also has 20 GB of internal storage. However, since 8K 360 recordings require a lot of storage space, this will not be sufficient for long, and you will definitely need a micro SD card as well. For smooth operation, you should use a very fast SD card for the A1 that has a speed rating of V30 and A2, such as this card from Lexar for example. The power button of the A1 is located here at the back. It is the only actual button on the drone. As with the other 2 devices, you turn on the drone by pressing the button once briefly and then pressing and holding it again immediately afterwards, and this at least for 2 seconds. You can turn off the drone in exactly the same way. So press once briefly and then press and hold the second time. One of the absolute highlights of the A1 are the vision goggles. The headset you need to fly the A1. The vision goggles have 2 screens inside. These are protected during transport with this cover. You should also clean the screens regularly with the cloth provided to ensure a clear view at all times. Once you have put on the vision goggles and switched them on, you can use these 2 adjustment knobs to adjust the focus if you are short-sighted or long-sighted. You can also slide the screens to the left and right to adjust them to the optimal distance for your eyes. When you use them for the first time, a special procedure starts so that you can adjust the vision goggles to suit you perfectly. The goggles also have an internal memory of about 30 GB. You can transfer recordings stored in internal memory via the data port at the bottom. There is another SD card slot between the 2 screens. You can use an SD card to expand the memory and record screen recordings during a flight. Or you can play back and relive recordings of your flights at home via the SD card without turning on the drone itself. But you can also watch other videos that were recorded with a traditional camera. The vision goggles also play the sound. You can adjust the volume using the buttons on the right hand side. The goggles also have another button on the left hand side, the home or linking button. You use this to link the vision goggles to the drone or to activate the see-through option. For optimal comfort, you can of course adjust the length of the strap. And very important, when flying, you should always unfold the antennas to enable better transmission. But it's time to turn on the goggles too. For this we need a battery. Plug the supplied USB cable into the battery and connect the cable here at the bottom left to the vision goggles. If you plan to fly the drone, you should put the battery around your neck with the lanyard. As mentioned, this reduces the weight of the goggles and improves wearing comfort. You can now turn on the goggles by turning on the battery in exactly the same way as the drone. Press the button on the battery once briefly, and then press and hold it. The right side of the goggles has a screen. In the default settings, this screen displays the drone's flight perspective during flight. This allows others to share in your flight. If you don't want this, you can display an animation. You can do this by swiping left or right with 2 fingers. But to navigate the goggles menu and control the drone, you need the grip controller. The grip controller has several buttons and controls. The power button is located here on the front right side. You turn on the grip controller as usual. Just press the power button once briefly and then press and hold. In addition to the power button, the grip controller has a trigger button to accelerate the drone in flight. This small button on the right is important because it opens the menu. On the top are 2 record buttons. The right one for photos, the left one for videos, and the 360 dial button, which you can use to adjust the heading of the drone. The important brake button to quickly stop the drone in an emergency or initiate a return to home. The flight slider to start the motors and take off. 2 customizable buttons here on the left side, and the flight mode toggle to switch between normal mode, sport mode and cine mode. In general, in sport mode, the drone flies faster and obstacle avoidance is disabled, so you have to fly very carefully. In cine mode, on the other hand, the drone flies slower, which allows for particularly precise and cinematic shots. And here's an important tip. It's easy to accidentally change the mode while holding the controller. So be careful, because you could unintentionally activate the sport mode and deactivate obstacle avoidance, which in the worst case could lead to a crash. Once all 3 devices are turned on, you can activate the drone and perform an update. To do this, you will need the Antigravity app. Launch the app and connect the drone. You can now activate the drone. The vision goggles and the drone should then pair automatically. Once this is done, you can connect the vision goggles to your home Wi-Fi. This is important to enable the firmware update. The app will now tell you if an update is available. You should definitely update the drone right away, because the update not only fixes bugs, but also adds new features. But keep in mind that this may take some time. You can follow the update process on the outer display of the goggles. Once the update is complete, we are ready for the first flight. But before that, I would like to show you the interface and the most important features of the drone. This is a screen recording of the vision goggles. By turning your head, you can look around freely at any time. This is made possible by the drone's 360 camera, and it works regardless of which flight mode you are in, which is certainly one of the coolest features of this drone. You can open the menu by briefly pressing the menu button once. A white beam with a small circle at the end will appear. You can move the beam and the small circle by moving the grip controller. Use the small circle to select a function and confirm with the trigger button. If the menu is not centered or the beam is not visible in the image, press the dial button. Don't turn it. Just press it in. This will center the beam and the menu interface. If there is a longer menu, as shown here, you can press and hold the trigger button and scroll up and down the menu by moving the motion controller. You can close the menu by pressing the menu button again. But let's take a closer look at the flight interface. At the bottom left, you can see information about the battery level of each device. For example, 85% for my drone and a remaining flight time of 28 minutes. Above that, you can see the remaining storage space on your storage media. On the right-hand side, you can see the most important flight information, such as how high the drone is, how far away it is, and how fast it is flying. In the default settings, the maximum altitude should be limited to 120 meters. I'll show you how to change that in a moment. The N on the left stands for the flight mode, so normal. It changes to S, for example, when you activate the sport mode. Just above that, you'll find information about the connection strength with the remote and the strength of the video signal transmitted to the goggles. This is important because if you lose the signal, you will no longer be able to control the drone and it will automatically initiate a return to home. This value here stands for the GNSS signal. In other words, the satellite connection. A connection is important so that the drone can detect the home point and fly back there, but also to enable better control of the drone. The other icons represent obstacle avoidance and a landing light. At the top right, you can see the camera settings information, which in my case is 8K at 30 frames per second. At the top left, you can see the duration of the current recording. So you can see that I am doing a screen recording with the vision goggles. In the middle is the status bar, which informs you about the flight status. As long as it is white or green, everything is fine. If it turns yellow or orange, then your attention is required. And when you turn your head and look in a direction that does not match the flight direction, a small image appears here that corresponds to the flight direction. This way you can always see where the drone is flying, even if you are looking in a different direction. And you should pay particular attention to this small radar down here. The triangle represents the drone. You can see in which direction the drone is flying and where it is in relation to the home point. The blue beam, on the other hand, indicates the direction you are looking in. And if you turn away from the drone, meaning you're looking in a different direction with the antennas, the home point turns red. That's not good, because it will weaken the signal to the goggles and could lead to a faster transmission interruption between the drone and the goggles. That's why you should always pay attention to this and turn your head in the direction of the drone. There is a shortcut menu that allows you to make quick adjustments even during flight. To open it, press and hold the menu button. To select a function, keep holding the menu button, point the controller in the appropriate direction, and then release the button to confirm the selection. Here you will find the most important settings you will need during flight. That's why you should familiarize yourself with them before your first flight. You can disable obstacle avoidance if, for example, you want to fly closer to an object. Normally, I would leave it on, as it has saved me from a few crashes. The default flight mode is the free motion mode. But there is also the FPV mode. I'll explain the difference in a moment. On the right, you can change the camera settings, and I'll show you the optimal settings in a moment too. On the left, you can view and play back your recordings. At the bottom left, you can start a screen recording with the vision goggles, and at the bottom right, you can also display a cockpit when flying in FPV mode. It's called cockpit, but it can also be a dragon or a broomstick. The other features of the main menu can wait, because it's time for us to take off and start our first flight. So place the drone on a level surface, ideally on a landing pad. And don't forget to manually unfold the landing gear first. Position the drone so that you are looking at it from behind and turn it on as usual. Turn on the motion controller and the vision goggles, and don't forget to unfold the goggles antennas. Make sure that the area in front of the drone is clear to allow for a safe takeoff. Now you can put on the goggles and see the image from the drone, so the interface that we have already looked at in detail. If you press the see-through button on the left side of the goggles twice briefly, you activate the see-through option. The goggles have a small camera on the front, allowing you to check your surroundings. Press the button twice again to return to the flight interface. Before you start flying, you should make sure that the GNSS signal has been received. This is necessary to enable the return to home function and better control of the drone. If you now press the flight slider twice briefly upwards, you will start the drone's motors. Now press it up and hold for at least 2 seconds, and the drone will take off and hover at an altitude of approximately 1.2 meters. If you now push the flight slider up again, the drone will continue to climb. If you push it down, it will descend. To enable a precise automated landing with the return to home function later on, you must use the flight slider to climb vertically to a height of at least 6 meters. Only then should you fly to a specific destination and move horizontally. The actual control is done via the so-called navigation dot. That's this icon here. Basically, the controls are extremely simple. You can move the navigation dot with the grip controller like a pointer. And when you press the trigger button, which accelerates the drone, it will fly exactly where the navigation dot is pointing. The controls are therefore extremely simple. This means that you move the grip controller to the left and push the throttle trigger button, and the drone moves to the left, to the right, and it moves to the right. You turn it up and it ascends, down and it descends. You basically control the drone as if you were moving a mouse pointer on a screen. When you release the trigger button, the drone will stop. To slow it down even faster in an emergency, briefly press the brake or return to home button once. The drone will then hover in place. Once you release the trigger button, you can change the drone's orientation with the dial and, for example, rotate the drone in the air to fly back along the same route. When you press the dial button, the perspective is centered again. And of course, you can continue to ascend or descend at any time by pushing the flight slider up or down, no matter which direction you fly. You can look around freely at any time. And as we've already seen, if the flight direction differs from your viewing direction, a small image appears at the top showing you a preview of the flight direction. Don't forget that you can choose between the 3 flight modes: normal, Cine and Sport on the left side of the grip controller, allowing you to change the speed of the drone. In theory, the maximum transmission range is up to 10 kilometers, but this is only the case under optimal conditions. And if an object blocks the view to the drone, the transmission can be interrupted much more quickly. The image will turn black and white and you will lose connection to the drone. But don't worry. In the default settings, the return to home function is now automatically activated and the drone flies back to the home point automatically. As soon as the connection is re-established, you can control the drone yourself again. This is another reason why it's so important to fly with an active satellite connection. And as mentioned, you can significantly influence the transmission range by turning the goggles in the direction of the drone. If you want to end your flight and land again, you can also activate the return to home function manually by pressing and holding the brake button. The drone will now ascend to the predefined altitude and fly back to the home point that was registered at takeoff and initiate an automatic landing. If you want to cancel the function, simply press the brake button again. As mentioned earlier, a precise landing is only possible if you have climbed to an altitude of at least 6 meters after takeoff without moving horizontally. However, it is usually faster to fly the drone back yourself and land it manually. In fact, the home point is displayed at all times. The landing itself may take some getting used to at first. As you can see, I always use a fairly conspicuous landing pad. When landing manually, you must ensure that the landing site is in an open area. Otherwise, the obstacle avoidance system may prevent you from flying close enough to the landing pad. You should also not stand too close to the landing pad yourself. Otherwise, you will be detected as an obstacle. If necessary, you can deactivate obstacle avoidance via the shortcut menu. Once the drone is above the landing pad, you can initiate the landing in 2 ways. By pointing the navigation dot down at the landing spot and then pressing the trigger button, or by pressing the flight slider down as soon as the drone is directly above the landing pad. The landing gear will extend automatically and the drone will normally land safely. In addition to the free motion mode, you can also fly the drone in FPV mode. To do this, open the shortcut menu and select FPV mode. The drone's controls will now change significantly. You no longer fly the drone by simply selecting the destination and accelerating, but rather like a real airplane. When you accelerate and turn the motion controller to the left, the drone turns to the left. The same applies to the right, of course. But beware, you have to turn the motion controller in a direction like this, and not like that. If you turn the motion controller upwards and accelerate, the drone will climb. If you turn it downwards, it will descend. The drone is also easy to control in this mode, and is perhaps even more fun to fly, even though precise targets are easier to aim for in free motion mode. And as we've already seen, in FPV mode, you can open the cockpit via the shortcut menu and fly on an air vehicle. I'll show you how to select your preferred air vehicle in a moment. Apart from that, you can of course also rotate the drone in FPV mode and initiate the return to home function. Even though flying and looking around freely is a lot of fun, the A1 also has another important function. It can take 360 videos and photos. The video mode is active in the default settings. Press the left record button to start and stop recording. Press and hold the right button, which is the photo button, to switch to photo mode. And take a photo by pressing the right button again. Press and hold the video recording button again for 2 seconds to switch back to video mode. And of course, you can also change the recording settings. To do this, open the shortcuts menu and select camera parameter settings. So how should you set the A1 here to achieve optimal results? You have the choice between the standard video mode and the slow motion mode. In slow motion mode, you can shoot at a frame rate of 100 frames per second, but only at a reduced resolution of 4K. This allows for a 25% slow motion recording, but I would only do this in exceptional cases and if you really need it, because you shouldn't forget that you can only take 360 shots with the A1, and if you want to convert these recordings into a conventional clip, you have to reframe them, which is nothing more than a heavy crop of the recording. I'll show you how the reframing works at the end of the video. For optimal results, you should therefore use the highest possible resolution. And this is only possible in standard video mode. The highest possible resolution on the A1 is 8K, and in most cases I would also shoot in 8K. In 8K, you have the choice between a frame rate of 24, 25, or 30 frames per second. Recordings at 30 frames per second look smoother and more natural than recordings at 24 or 25 frames per second. However, since professional movies are made at 24 frames per second, this frame rate is considered more cinematic, and a professional filmmaker would prefer this frame rate. But since there are no ND filters for the A1 and you can create natural motion blur in daylight, a recording at such a low frame rate can look very choppy. Personally, I therefore prefer 30 frames per second. 60 frames per second would create an even smoother and more natural look. But for this, you'd have to reduce the resolution to 5.2K, which I would rather avoid. The A1 has to find the optimal exposure for a 360-degree view. This sometimes results in slightly overexposed footage, and very bright areas of the image in particular can burn out in such cases. Therefore, it can be advantageous to set the exposure compensation to -0.3 or -0.7 under EV. I usually leave the white balance on automatic. Under Pro, you can set the exposure completely manually. This is not easy on a 360 camera, so I usually work with automatic exposure. If you select Settings here, you will open the advanced shooting settings. 3 settings are particularly important here. Right at the top, you can set where the clip should be saved, either in the drone's internal memory or on the SD card. For optimal results, you should also set the bitrate to high. This will result in larger files, but more image information will be saved. And under Image Adjustment, you can adjust the contrast, saturation and sharpness. The A1's recordings do not have much contrast, especially when it is very bright. In such cases, I would add contrast, but I prefer to do this in post-processing. For a more cinematic look, it may be useful to reduce the sharpness to -1. Try it out and see if you like it. There is also an overexposure warning, which shows you overexposed areas and indicates that you should perhaps reduce the overexposure compensation a little, as we have just seen. In the shooting settings, you can also select the HDR photo mode or the burst mode. And of course, there is also a RAW format for photos. I think you're now ready for your first flights and to take some cool shots. However, the Antigravity A1 has a number of other features and settings that you should definitely be aware of. To access these, you need to open the main menu. As we've seen, you do this by briefly pressing the menu button once. In the middle, you will see a map of your position, and underneath that, your recordings. If you select one of them, you can play it back in the goggles and look around freely during playback, allowing you to relive the flight completely. At the top left, you can initiate a return to home, and here you can set what the drone should do if the connection is lost. I would definitely leave this set to return to home. I would also leave the obstacle avoidance behavior set to brake. The return altitude should be high enough, and I would leave the maximum flight altitude at 120 meters for now. Up to 400 meters is possible, but 120 meters is the maximum altitude for flying without a drone license in most countries. As you can see, we have already seen some of these functions and settings, such as the FPV mode, screen recording and the camera settings in the shortcuts menu. Under Virtual Cockpit, you can select which cockpit or aircraft should be displayed in FPV mode. There are several dragons, but also a broom, an airplane or a spaceship. Of course, this is more of a gimmick, but the kids will love it. As mentioned at the beginning, you can personalize the 2 small buttons on the left side. Basically, however, there are only 3 functions to choose from: activating the landing lights, extending the landing gear, or activating the see-through function. In the default settings, the camera image of the direction you're currently looking at with the goggles is displayed on the right-hand side of the goggles. If you swipe left or right with 2 fingers on the left-hand side, you can display a substitute animation. Here, you can choose between different animations. While transmission aspect ratio is not that important for now, it is quite possible that the goggles will fog up on the inside. That's why there is a defogging function that ventilates the goggles. Here, you can also adjust the brightness and sound level of the goggles. This menu we have just seen is called Quick Settings and corresponds to the icon on the far left in the bottom bar. For even more settings, there are detailed menus for the safety settings or the camera settings. Interestingly, under Flight Control, you can also change the flight behavior and acceleration values. And in the general settings, you can set the language or check the firmware. However, you will rarely need most of these settings. What is much more interesting is that the Antigravity A1 also has a number of intelligent flight modes. You can find them in the menu overview on the left-hand side. All 3 intelligent flight modes can be set using the customizable buttons on the left side. The lower button is the C1 button, and the upper button is the C2 button. With Deep Track, you can select a subject, and the drone will then follow the subject fully automatically. It's very easy to do. Press and hold the C1 button, and use the grip controller to form a frame around the subject, and tracking will start. In addition to a simple tracking function, there is also the option of flying in an orbit around the subject. Press and hold the C2 button to cancel tracking. Under Sky Genie, you can select one of the many predefined movement sequences, and the drone will then perform the flight fully automatically. For me, the first 2, Orbit and Anti-Gravity Line, are among the best. You will always see a short preview on the left. Basically, all flight paths can be started in the same way. Select one. Let's take orbit for example. Then select a subject again, such as a building. Do this in the same way as before by pressing and holding the C1 button and drawing a frame around the subject. Then press C1 again to start the flight. Recording will start automatically, and just like before, you end the flight by pressing and holding C2. Sky Genie can be very important because it is relatively difficult to fly certain sequences, such as an orbit around a building manually with the A1. In the settings, you can specify whether the view during the flight should correspond to the direction of flight or whether you can look around freely. And with SkyPath, you can set specific waypoints that the drone will then fly to in a predetermined sequence. This is also easy. Select Create a route and then fly to the first waypoint. Once you are there, tap C1. Then fly to the next position and press C1 again. If you want to delete a waypoint, press C2. Once you have set all the waypoints, press and hold C1. Now you can save the route and start the flight. Below, you can set the speed and smoothness. With C2, you can cancel the flight. However, the route is also saved for later. This means you can call up a list of your routes and fly the route again at any time. And this can be very useful. Let's say you've now completed a flight and taken some good shots. How can you transfer the files and reframe the shots? This last step is also an extremely important and necessary step when using the A1. There are several ways to transfer your shots. Of course, you can use the SD card if the shot is actually on the SD card. Remember that both the drone and the vision goggles feature internal storage. The second option is to connect the drone to a computer using a USB cable. The storage and SD card will then be recognized as a drive. To do this, you'll need to turn on the drone. Alternatively, you can turn on the drone and connect it to the Antigravity app. You don't need to turn on the vision goggles to do this. Tap on Album and select the source at the top, either drone storage or SD card. Now you can select a recording, view it or download it. And whether you download it or not, you can now reframe the recording right here in the app and export it as a conventional video clip. And there are several ways to reframe your recordings. Right at the start, you should select the format for your clip in the top right corner. So if you need the clip vertically in a 9:16 format or horizontally in a 16:9 format. There are also two other formats, 1:1 and 2.35:1. You can freely look around by swiping your finger across the display. With two fingers, you can change the field of view and zoom in and out. With mega, linear and narrow, there are predefined fields of view, where some of the distortion has been removed. If you are now between mega and linear, you can use dewarp to reduce the distortion even further. Distortion usually doesn't look good in aerial shots. That's why I would recommend activating dewarp. Below, you will also find several preset viewing directions: fixed forward, backward, left, right or downward. You could now simply select the best viewing direction, for example forward, then adjust the framing a little, perhaps directing the view slightly downward, and you're ready to export the clip. Before doing so, however, I would use the crop tool to remove the unnecessary parts at the beginning and end. That would be the first option for reframing. If you select the glasses in the middle here, the pilot's view is reproduced exactly, meaning the direction you were looking in during the flight. But this view is usually not optimal for reframing. And if you don't feel like doing the reframing yourself, select the AI feature on the right. This analyzes the recording and creates a completely reframed version based on the recording. You can view it and check whether it is actually the optimal result. In most cases, an alternative is even offered. But if you want to do everything yourself and also want to add movements, you have to use keyframes. Move to a position in the clip, adjust the framing optimally, and then tap the plus icon. The editor will now open and your keyframe will be displayed in orange. Move to another position in the clip, adjust the framing again, and create a new keyframe. The framing will now automatically adjust between the first and second keyframes. This allows you to add your own movement to the recording, but there are also preset movements. To use them, move to a point in the clip and tap on movement. You can now choose from a variety of exciting movements. And if you select record, which is also available on the first page, you can adjust the framing in real time while the clip is playing, either by changing it with your finger or by moving your smartphone. And these movements are then saved in the clip. There is also an editor where you can select individual scenes from a longer clip, which also includes a tracking function or an auto-edit function that automatically creates a montage with music from the recording. Yes, it's easy to get overwhelmed here. To start with, I recommend working with the viewing directions, adjusting them slightly, shortening the clip, and then exporting it. A little later, you can then work with keyframes. When exporting, select Flat Video and you can set the resolution and bitrate here. For optimal results, select 4K with the maximum bitrate. I would remove the watermark. Reframing in the Studio desktop app works very similarly, and I personally prefer the desktop app for reframing. Here too, you will find the preset viewing directions and can work with keyframes. But the larger screen alone makes reframing easier and clearer. Most of today's recordings and screen recordings were taken before the last update. And as you can see here, a simulator has been added to the right side of the menu. Open it up and you can now sit down at home with your vision goggles and grip controller and practice flying in frame motion mode and FPV mode. A landscape has been recreated here and everything works just like in a real flight. A very useful new feature. Now you know everything you need to know to take your first great shots with your A1 and achieve good results. If you don't already own the Antigravity A1, the A1 is currently on sale for a limited time and you can get it at a 15% discount. You can find a link to it in the video description. And if you use the link in the description, you'll receive a landing pad as a free gift. There will be more videos and tutorials on the Antigravity A1. So stay tuned and see you next time.